when we're working together, I try my best to tell you what psychotherapy is, how I work, what informs my practice, why I do what I do. But this is enmeshed in the time we have and the sessions we have as we're dealing with the nitty gritty of what's happening in your life. And now I want to take some time to, in a slow way, try to fill in the gaps and tell you in more detail all of these pieces that would fall within what is called psychoeducation these days. Funny enough, I want to start by saying that originally, when psychotherapy first started, and that goes back to 1895, is the beginning of psychotherapy with Sigmund Freud in Vienna working and creating psychoanalysis. For a long, long, long period, the idea that telling your patients how you work or why it is you do what you do and so on was frowned upon. If you're a therapist, you're a psychoanalyst, a therapist, you're supposed to heal people just by acting, not by teaching. Now, the year would have been 1998, and I was attending a seminar, it's an ongoing weekly seminar, with a uh, well known psychoanalyst. His name is Norman Deutsch, and he had the seminar for residents at what used to be called the Clark Institute, that's on College and Spadina, what now is called CAMH. So I was lucky enough to be in this group, and he was teaching Freud to and psychoanalysis, psychodynamic theory to the residents. And then he asked the following question. He said, when you're um, talking to a patient about psychoanalysis, if that's what you do, uh, how do you tell them about, lying on the couch? How do you say, hey, by the way, you're going to come um, to my office and you're going to lie down on the couch? And everyone around the table was like, no, I don't tell them anything. It's just a couch. That's it. This is psychoanalysis. You're supposed to know that this is what we do. And then he said, listen, what we do is already strange enough for you to ask someone to lie on a couch and bobble away. Like, why would you do that? I said, no. I take a lot of pains in explain to people why it is that being on the couch is the way to go. And since then, a lot has happened, and we, in the field, we believe that understanding the process of therapy is very efficient in terms of helping you deal with it, in terms of helping you show up as a patient. How can you use the session to your advantage? How can you really squeeze the most out of your sessions? So um, these days we do that. The problem is that we don't have a heck of a lot of time to explain to our patients all of these details. It'll be like a lecture, basically. And then we accommodate here and there pieces of psychoeducation. We can, hey, read this or watch this, or this is why we call this and that, and so on. For many concepts. Um, Something comes to mind. I work with a lot of folks who suffer from PTSD, and a piece of psychoeducation that usually goes along with PTSD therapy is teaching you about what an amygdala hijack is. So that would be a piece of psychoeducation. Understanding that is very empowering. It's, oh, this is what's happening to me. I get it. Anyway, when I first went to therapy myself, I remember my first analyst was his office was on St. Clair and Young, and I remember it was winter time. I coming out of the subway station with my heavy coat, and I walk up to his office, and he opens the door, and I walked in. I had a bag across my chest and the heavy coat, and I didn't know anything, so I just walked in and lied down on the couch with everything I had on me. And so we started, and he says, "Why didn't you take your jacket off?" And I said, "I don't know." Am I supposed to, or am I just supposed to walk into and lie down on the couch? No, no, you can take it off next time. So, okay, good. But this is just to tell you that, you know, the mysticism or the lack of understanding of what the process is, and plus, you know, you're starting therapy, which is a very, uh, you know, it's a process that causes a lot of anxiety. And what am I going to talk about? What is that going to be like? And I was a psychologist student. I knew a heck of a lot about psychoanalysis already at the time, and I had been wanting to be in analysis for years. So that moment when you decide to call somebody, to engage somebody, is, is quite a thing, it's quite unique. So I'm making this video for my patients primarily because I love talking to you, and we have built this relationship where I know you're going to be appreciative of what I'm going to say. But I'm also, if you're checking me out, if you're out there and you're checking me out, we're likely maybe to schedule a 15-minute call to talk. But I mean, how do you gauge from talking to me or anybody for 15 minutes if we're going to be a good match? That's kind of hard. So if you're checking me out, well, I'll tell you how I work. I'll explain why I do what I do. And if by any chance you stumble upon this video and you're in therapy already, I'm sure that what I'm going to say is fairly germane to what your therapist would say, and it will also help you squeeze the most out of your session. So, um, the first thing that I want us to talk, I've made some notes here, is what is psychotherapy? This is a staple. You go to any website by any therapist, any psychologist, and you're going to see a little tab that says, "What is psychotherapy?" Well, I'll tell you how I explain what psychotherapy is. So I use analogies. So the first analogy that I love to use is that psychotherapy, I want you to compare psychotherapy to physiotherapy. In fact, I call psychotherapy the physiotherapy of the mind. When you go to physiotherapy, you have an injured area in your body. What do they do? Well, they need that area, the electrically stimulated, magnetically stimulated. They add, heat, cold, stretch, a little weight, you name it. Where was I? By the way, the iPhone has this feature so useful to me that you can pause the video if you have to stop and then you get back to it. Really helpful for the technology challenged people like myself. So when you go to physio, they need your area, they electrically stimulate your area, they stretch it, they add little weights and so on. And I was curious enough to engage some physiotherapists in talking about what do you do, what you do. I looked it up, I asked ChatGPT, and guess what? When they do all of these stimulations, no one really knows exactly what's going on. What is it that this helps? But there are several theories, and some of these theories involve that this stimulation that we're doing here physically, it speaks to the brain, and the brain is the one that decides how to get to the area, release whatever substances it needs to release, do whatever needs to be happened there. It controls that. So this stimulation is speaking to the brain, and nobody really knows why heat or cold or electrical stimulation, magnetic. It's just stimulation and telling the brain, you got work to do. I want you to heal this area. There's an intentionality placed there. So this is fascinating to me as a clinician because that's exactly what we do in therapy. You come to therapy and you say, I have the symptom, and we're going to talk about the symptom, but I have the symptom. And what we do, whatever it is we do, is the equivalent of these physical techniques, this physical stimulation to the body, just that directly to the brain. And we use that speech. Fundamentally, psychotherapy is associated with language. We talk to you. So even if some modalities they involve gimmicks, like for example, you have in Gestalt-oriented therapies, they use the chair. The therapist will bring a chair and say, by the way, we don't use the couch, but we use a chair. So these relational issues, this unfinished business that you have with this person in your life that could be, well, deceased or is a parent that you can't speak to. So, well, pretend that they're sitting in that chair and you talk to them. Well, like electrical or magnetic or whatever type of stimulation, acupuncture, the chair, the empty chair becomes that feature that stimulates you to do what? Talk. Talk some more. Talk some more. So the fundamental thing that I want you to understand if you're working with me is that your speech, what you say, those words, those sentences, is the fundamental vehicle through which we stimulate your machinery. So this mind-brain machinery, we're speaking to it. Then there's action. Eventually, there's action as well. You're going to carry out some actions that are going to be very transformative. And I do want to talk to you about the topic of action in specific. But for now, let's stay with words. So, to the point, I want you to understand this, hear this out, to the point that very, very prominent psychoanalysts, and two come to mind. One is a French guy, and one day I really want to talk to you about this dude, Jacques Lacan. This guy is the maximum thing in psychoanalysis in France and in many parts of the world as well. Who consider Lacan like the true, genius of psychoanalysis after Freud. Well, to be debated, it's debatable, but let me tell you how important this guy was. And Lacan believed that ultimately, just the fact that you're lying on the couch and you're babbling away, you're talking, was enough to produce significant therapeutic effects. And there's another dude in New York, very interesting dude. His name was Hyman Spotnitz. And Spotnitz was also the same mind, just talk, 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 talk. So the extent to how that speech produces healing, something that I want to talk to you about. But for now, again, let's stay with why speech is so fundamental. So when Freud started, he would have, this is 1895, 1900, this guy's creating psychotherapy from nothing. He's a neuroscientist. This guy's working with neurons, and he wants to be what Freud really wants to do, is become a professor at the university. Somehow he realizes that that's not going to happen anytime soon, and he has to make ends meet. He wants to marry this girl named Martha, and he has no money. So then he goes to France, and at the time, people were working with hysteria. Hysteria was the symptom of the time. And mostly it was, if not all, they were all females, and these females had symptoms, physical symptoms, that resembled neurological problems. So, for example, they couldn't stand, had balance issues. They couldn't feel, one of them couldn't feel the side of their face, paralysis, stuff like that. And he goes to see this famous French psychiatrist who was using hypnosis to heal these women. So he would, Charcot was the name of the guy. So Charcot will get these women into a hypnotic trance, and then he will say, hey, your area is okay. I don't exactly know what he would say. I never seen actually a transcript of what Charcot was alleged to say, but there was a relief of the symptoms. So Freud goes there and he learns how to hypnotize people, and he comes back and he begins to do this, his hypnosis thing. Interesting. Uh, Once in a while, I do get calls or requests, or someone asks me, "Do you do hypnosis?" And I say, "No, I don't." You know, I did play with hypnosis when I was, undergrad. There's some interesting things in hypnosis, but I do not practice hypnosis. And the question as to where they're coming from, folks who ask about hypnosis, is this idea that I'm struggling with something and it's so hard that I really have this fantasy that if someone could hypnotize me and say, uh, from now on, you're not going to feel the need to do this, or you're never going to remember this, or I'm healed. Imagine that. How fantastic that would be. Well, that wasn't quite happening with these women who are hysteria. The symptom was coming back. It was short, the relief was short lived. And then Freud is also, I think someone said that he wasn't the greatest of hypnotizers, whatever, the circumstances at the time. Freud realizes that talking, he just gets a glimpse at talking. It's actually what does the trick. He's working with this woman whose actual name was Bertha, but in the literature, when he wrote about Bertha, he called her Anna O. And Anna O, interestingly enough, went on to found, this is one of Freud's first patients, he went to found the School of Social Work in Germany. So history is happening when Freud is inventing psychoanalysis, inventing therapy. It's called psychoanalysis, but it was the therapy of the day. So, being a neurologist, Freud begins to talk about the connection between language and the body and emotions. So all of this is happening in his mind. And to make the story short, it appears to him that there is a direct influence between what you say. Remember, you tell the patient in hypnosis, don't think about this anymore, don't act this way anymore, what have you. Um, but also, when Anna is talking and talking about her life, and she feels relieved afterwards, she calls that, chimney sweeping. You clean your chimney, you empty yourself and talk about the things that are in your mind, and you experience a relief. So, Freud, being a scientist, this is very important, where the use of the couch comes from. Well, Freud is thinking as a scientist, this is a lab. Think of a lab. You enter a lab and you have gloves and you have all these things to what? To make sure you don't influence the experiment in any way. That you don't bring any other variable but what you're dealing with at that moment. So that's what he has in mind. So he says, you lie down. I don't need to see your face. I don't care about any of that. I just want to hear what you're saying, your speech. And Freud begins to interpret, and if you go to the early interpretations of Freud, are all based on language. You're saying this here, but what about that? It's an exchange of words, but not in a conversation. I'm not looking at you face to face. I'm sitting this way and you're lying this way, your head is here, your feet are over there. I'm not even looking at how you move on the couch, just listening to you. So, and I will give back to you a piece of speech. As this is happening, as the language is, being produced into free associations, because to Freud it's fundamental that the patient free associate And I'll explain to you what free association was to Freud. So Freud said, whatever comes to mind, particularly if what comes to mind is something you're ashamed of, is embarrassed to talk about, or you think is silly. This is even more important that you uh, tell me these things. This is free association. So I'm going to tell you why this is happening. This is very essential for you to understand so that you can lean on the power of your speech in healing. So I'm going to use the pause now. So I'm going to draw something for you to explain this part. Okay, so remember, Freud is a neuropsychologist, and he's thinking about neurons. So Freud thought something like this. Okay, think about this as a neuron here, and this neuron is connected to another neuron, which is connected to another neuron. And the connection here, I want you to think about it as path. So some of them will be thicker, which means they're wider, it's easier to go through this path, and some of them will be narrower. He has, at the time, he's working with what is called a hydraulic idea, a model. And hydraulic comes from hydro, comes from water. So think of these connections as water channels. You know, the wider the channel, the easier it is to navigate between these two areas, between these two neurons. And of course, if it, is narrower, it's going to be more complicated, obviously. So he believes that this is the idea of free association. So you have a well-traveled path, and this well-traveled path involves what you already know. Uh, for example, when you come to therapy, one of the things that is very likely to happen after the second, the third session, the fourth session, you're going to tell me, you're going to tell your therapist, I have told you everything. You know about my mom, you know about my dad, you know about my siblings, right? I've told you everything, you know my history. That's it. And what Freud would say is that, you know what? There are aspects, there are areas in your brain where you have all their neurons that are connected in a weak way to these ones here. There's almost no connection. Maybe you have to kayak between these two because there's no connection. And it's important to integrate this area here. This is, by the way, this is what would be called repression. This is what repression is. Repression is you're not even aware of, let's say, a memory that happened when you were, I don't know, 8 or 9. And this memory involves something you need to know. Is behind your symptoms, something that is happening to you today could be related to this, but it's suppressed. It's not connected. So if you're only talking about what is meaningful, which is this well-traveled path among these three neurons, well, you're never going to get to that. But let's say a silly association comes to you as you're going through this, something is pulling you from here, something about a toy, or it could be a dream. And you're going to suppress. I mean, why are we going to talk about a toy? Or why are you going to, you're lying down on the couch and all of a sudden, a memory about, a song that you haven't thought about that song for a long time comes to you, and you're going to suppress that. You're going to choose not to tell that to your analyst. Say, no, that's silly. I'm not going to talk about that. So Freud would say, no. You need to bring this in because this is the way, the faint way in which we may strengthen this connection here. So you don't have to kayak into this area. Maybe we can, tend sort of a tenuous bridge for the time being. And eventually, as this grows into a path, this gets integrated into the larger network. But what happens then is that all of these paths will have to be recalibrated. So let me just announce to you. So this is created in 1895, 95 or about. Well, guess what? This is completely compatible with the cutting edge of how cognitive scientists think about the mind at this point. So this would be compatible with something that is called, a connectionist network, or with a neural network. And when I work with some of you who are in the business of computer science, lots of my clients have some connection with computer science. This language sort of helps you understand what psychotherapy is. So we started out with physiotherapy and stimulation, and here comes the second way of explaining what psychotherapy is. So this is a neuron. These are neurons, but they could also be topics. Like I said, it could be anything, everything about my dad, or like the famous Woody Allen movie, Everything About My Mother is here. So it's a schematic way of representing contents or a sentence. You went from this word to this word. Instead of choosing the word dad, you chose uncle. What happens there? It's very important to listen when you're a therapist to the chain of content. Let me pause this again. Yeah, I was saying it's very important when you're a therapist to listen not just to the content of what you're saying, but in which order, how you're saying it. So this is a look from behind the scenes on how I'm listening to you. When you're talking to me, that's exactly what I'm hearing. I'm not just hearing what you're saying, but in which order this is coming. And obviously, when you practice something for a long time, this is integrated into your implicit learning. I don't have to be thinking these things, obviously. I don't have to keep track of that. My brain keeps track of it. It knows where to listen to. And this way of listening at the time of Freud called it even hovering attention, which meant that if you only pay attention to the main path, you're going to miss out on the little details. You're going to miss out on what's coming that you're not paying attention to. I have some great anecdotes about this, of how this works. And perhaps the one that is very dear to me, because it involves my work with someone that I really liked working with, very hardworking individual. Started working when they were very young, an adolescent, and I had this pleasure of seeing this person um, grow and evolve. Is the greatest pleasure you can have in this parental position we have as clinicians, to see someone develop and grow and heal. So anyway, this person is talking to me, and we're talking about ADD, ADHD, and how school is affected and whatnot. And I'm helping them with homeworks and what have you, adapting what I can to my practice to their age. And in one session, this person casually says, "Oh no, because of my uncle, blah 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 blah." And I don't know why. I simply say, "Your uncle?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "How come? We've been working for a long time by then, 2 years, 3 years. Um, how come you've never mentioned your uncle before?" And they said, "Boom, because they molested me." wow, all of a sudden, and this is something that happens frequently in therapy, there's sudden disclosures. Uh, Patients all of a sudden felt like this is the moment to say it, and sometimes it's planned. Most of the time, I think it's not planned. It just, you feel it, it comes out. We have a relationship, boom, it comes out. Well, if I had not been curious about, just I heard uncle for the first time, who is this uncle? Uh, who knows how long, much longer it would have taken them to process that. So the way of listening to this is connected to language. This is your speech about your mom, your speech about your dad, relationship, but then the details around that, what we're talking about. So these details are fundamental. And let's connect this to the face-to-face work. Because when Freud is listening, he's not looking at you, he's not paying attention to your facial expressions, to your tone of voice. It's just, your speech, your sequence of words as it is. So now we're face-to-face. You're not free associating. You're not standing in front of us. You're standing in front of me, and you're like, okay, blah, 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 blah. This is happening embedded in the context of a face-to-face conversation. So the third proposal to understand psychotherapy is that psychotherapy is fundamentally a conversation between two human beings. Psychotherapy is not at all the encounter between a client and an expert, and the client is going to be like, hey, this is my problem, and the expert's going to be, hey, this is how you solve it. And this is something we're going to talk about as well. This idea, quite detrimental to the process of therapy, because it excludes your participation, what your role is in the session. So in the context of talking to each other, we're having a conversation, free association is going to be present in the same way that when you're sitting in a backyard, uh, inside, you're around a drink, and you're talking to someone you feel very comfortable talking to. And then you go through the archetypical, hey, I just thought about this. Hey, have you ever thought about this and that? Have you ever considered this? Oh, I just remember now, one time when I was a kid. That's the conversation that needs to happen in therapy, right? And to get to that point is what we do. Everything we do is help you, coach you to get to that point where we can converse in exactly that. Again, let me say it again. You're talking to somebody you feel very comfortable talking to in a context that is conducive to having that kind of conversation. Think of summertime's the backyard, you're sitting with someone there you feel comfortable talking to, you're sipping a beer, you're sipping a glass of wine, you're inside, uh, you're same scenario, having a coffee, and you feel very comfortable. And there's no specific goal. We're hanging out, right? We're hanging out and we're letting our conversation flow. That would be the equivalent to the psychotherapy session, with the caveat that we have a goal. When you're sitting with that person you care about and you feel comfortable talking to, you may not have necessarily a goal. We're talking here because we're talking here. Now, when we meet with the mindful, is a mindful engagement, is how can we help the two of us help you with something that may be clear, maybe not too clear, but that's what we're trying to do. It's the difference between the two settings. It's mindful engagement towards a specific goal of healing, a declared goal of healing. Now, this model here will allow us to talk as well about what does the cure look like? How do you heal in therapy? What happens in therapy when you heal? Well, some of that is already here. So one uh, cognitive science way of looking at what happens in the machinery as you speak would be to say, well, the cure is the effect of integrating these complexes into the larger network. Whatever is separated, whatever you're not paying attention to, you need to pay attention to, needs to be integrated into the larger network. I have another analogy that I use with my patients. Okay, so think of a city, and you're new to this place. So you know how you have the streets in the city, you have circles, you have a combination of places that connect to each other, and buildings and parks and what have you. Well, think about you're new to the city and you're living in this place here. And the next day you have to go to a conference, you have to go to a place, and that place is here. So as you look into the maps and GPS and what have you, if you had to walk to this place, maybe you'll say, well, the easiest way for me would be to, walk down this path here and then take a little street here, right? And then you memorize that way of going there. So that will be the equivalent of the main path. However, as your familiarity with this territory grows, you will be able to create n numbers, n numbers of ways to get to from this point to this point. You will be able to, regardless of where in the city you are, your brain will immediately create a path to this place. So why? Because the map has been incorporated by you. Your brain can create any combinations to get there. So when you have this complex here, and when we talk about complexes, I'm reminded, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but back in the day when someone was suffering from any kind of emotional disorder, it was that he's or she's full of complexes. These complexes that they have. Well, complex as in the industrial military complex is, how many factories, transportation, logistics, computer systems, people involved, all that connection is a complex. So the more complex an organization is, the more paths are to accomplish something. The more flexibility the company will have to generate to survive. So thinking of the mind as a complex, thinking of your language as a matching element to that complexity in your mind, what Freud is saying, what you say is a match somehow to how things are connected in your mind. So if we fix it at the level of your speech, if we connect it, rather, if we make new connections, your brain by itself, the machine by itself will alter all these connections to incorporate this in. So likewise here. So the more you talk about a topic, the more comfortable you will be talking about that topic, the more you will go back to that well and come back with information. And we all have that. We all have this experience. There's certain stories, certain aspects of your life that you've said many times, over and over, over and over. And one day, something different comes back to you that you have never thought about. And here's an anecdote about that. I was working with this police officer who suffered from PTSD. And one day, as it had happened many times when you work with police officers, something that happens a lot is, we call it the processing of calls, difficult calls, what happened there. And again, there's many different ways of slicing that pie. How do you talk about it and so on? But this time, as he's telling me the scene that, he walked into this house, he went to the second floor, there was a person there who had committed suicide. And he said he looked around, okay, person is there, and moved towards the window, slightly towards the window, and then felt something in his leg. The person was not dead. They reached out for him. As he's telling me this, he starts sobbing. And as he's sobbing, he's telling me, I've said this story many, many times. I've never cried telling this story. So something there with the timing of telling me the story, whatever context we were involved at that point, I don't remember. But something clicked, something was integrated that for the first time, he is able to cry, really cry about this poignant moment. Someone who indeed died is reaching out for your help. Imagine that. And not being able to cry for a long time. So that's the integration I'm talking about. You're going to talk about in therapy the same things because that's what you do in therapy. This is where the physiotherapy analogy is helpful. When you are in the physiotherapy analogy, what do? You repeat the same thing. There's something about therapy that is repetitive, any kind of therapy. You go over and over the same path. You talk about things in slightly different ways. Not all the time, of course, you're not going to be talking about exactly the same things every session, but the themes that are important to you are going to be recycled in our conversation in different ways, And I'm listening to that, and you're listening to that. And one day, we were going to come back to that in some different angle. That's the experience that we have had, you and I, many times. Never thought about it that way. I never, now that I think about it, now that I say it out loud, that process of insight, this is what is called an insight, you realize something, is realize, like John Vervaeke would say in the two connotations. It would be realize in that you find out something that you had not thought about before, and realize in the sense of something that is made, is happening, is carried out, is made into a statement. So that double sense of realization is constantly happening in therapy. Now, there is a third analogy that I use in my work with you to talk about therapy, what therapy is. And that is to compare therapy with a martial art or with a high level skill, such as learning how to play an instrument, learning music. As you engage in these very repetitive things, both martial arts and music require a lot of repetition, a lot of going over patterns, muscle memory, all of that. As this is happening, this repetition, eventually you're going to come to moments where you go from plateau to a jump in skill. This jump in skill is the equivalent to what happens in therapy. You're repeating relational issues. You're repeating your story over and over. And one day, something's going to click because we're stimulating the machine. What's going to heal you, and this is something very important that I want you to hear, only your brain mind can heal you. Only that is going to fix the injury in the shoulder, and only that is going to help you produce a new behavior, process things that you need to process. Only the machine. You and I are working together like a physiotherapist and a patient in how to stimulate that machine. That's what we're doing. I remember a patient whom I saw very briefly. I was working for an EAP at the time. I was working for what at the time was called Warren Chappelle. And this patient uh, came to me for a different issue, but he said, I've been to therapy before. And he said, my mom lives in Montreal. And I grew up feeling that was in a very cold, unfeeling family. We didn't talk, that talk. And then he said, one day I went to Montreal, and when my mom opened the door, and she was going to just give me a kiss and, hello. And I said, no, no, mom. From now on, we hug. In this family, we hug. Come here. And it wasn't something he planned. He said, it just came over me. I just said, no, 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 no. We're not doing that shit anymore of the little kiss on the back and the cheek. No, no, no. We're full body embracing. So to get to that point is the equivalent of, if you ever done any high level skills, sports wise, martial arts. I like, the frame of martial arts. So one day, he said, I was able to slip that. I was able to get out of that. I had an escape that day, you know, and it's quite that feeling of accomplishment. My youngest child, who was doing wrestling, uh, recently came to me and said, Dad, I did my first escape. And he was so happy about that. I was like, wow, yeah. So your brain finds that. So what? Repetition, not being able to escape, not being able to escape over and over, boom, living with something that requires a change is um, equivalent to wanting to learn a new skill. You and your partner are fighting, arguing, and it seems to never end. And I want to talk about couples therapy at some point as well, and why people get stuck in there. Well, being in a relationship is a skill. There's this aspect of skill building that is incredibly fundamentally important for you to understand. You're coming to therapy to develop a skill. And what we do, whichever way we use to stimulate your mind, whichever technique we use, that's what we're doing. And let me just take this moment to talk to you about the techniques. Sometimes I get a call and people say, "Oh, my doctor said to look for CBT. What I need to do is CBT, or I'm looking for EMDR, or I'm looking for DBT, or I'm looking for someone who is psychoanalytical oriented." What people look for these things? I don't quite know what these things are. Someone said this person does one of the T's: EFT, CBT, DBT. Um, IFS is very popular right now. So uh, the idea of looking at psychotherapy from the frame of martial arts is also very beneficial in this regard, because we're looking at what is the martial art that really you need to learn. What is the martial art of martial arts? I remember being a child and me and my friends talking about, would a wrestler beat a judo guy? Would a karate guy beat a boxing guy? Is boxing the best, or is wrestling the best? All of these conversations, very, very equivalent to the kind of conversations um, in the field we have had over decades. Which is the martial art of the mind that really works? And then you have a bunch of research, saying, "Oh, CBT is the one that's really, connected to data and best practices and whatnot." And oh, no, no, it's DBT. You have, this lady named, Marshall Linehan saying, "No, no, no, I'm telling you, DBT is the absolute best you can do. My technique is amazing." In the same way that someone could refer to martial arts. Now, the thing of martial arts got resolved because in 1992, this UFC, mixed martial arts thing started, And we got to see, what martial art was more efficient at the time. If you did not know ground game, if you didn't have wrestling, if you didn't have jiu-jitsu, you were in dire straits. When you go to the ground, that was a big problem. But things evolved, and nowadays in martial arts, it's called mixed martial arts because you need to know fundamentally three things. You need to know how to strike. You need to know how to wrestle, and you need to know how to submit. And striking is a whole area, and wrestling is another whole area, and grappling is another whole. You need to know these things. The equivalent to this in therapy, the way I see it, is that when it comes to therapy, you need to know about behavior. Someone has a behavior, has a problem with their behavior. How do you understand behavior? You need to have a theory of behavior. You need to have a practice of how to deal with behaviors. And then there's cognitions, there's thoughts, there's speech, there is all this a content that is being produced in a session. Well, you need to have a theory of that as well. And then there's emotions. What is an emotion? How do you deal with emotions? So, whatever martial art of the mind one practices, you have to have a confidence. You have to be able to have solutions, responses, ways of dealing with these three areas, which are the equivalent of martial arts. Which one? Well, as a practitioner, when you're a mixed martial artist, you need to have some confidence in yourself as a fighter, that whatever it is it leads you to victory. So when you are a practitioner, whatever however you learned it, because a bunch of things come into play when you're trying to become a therapist. What is it that you feel attracted to? What is it you like? What is it that's available to you? Where do you work that people there can coach you in learning this instead of that? But at the end of the day, obviously, you must be confident. You must be certain that this you do is efficient. It helps people. So when you come to see me or you go to see anybody else, whatever I have learned, it will come into play. So I'm looking at the time here. It's been yapping for about an hour. I'm going to leave it here so not to become too long, too overwhelming. Have more topics, so I guess I'll continue on a different video. I hope I can um, continue doing this. If it is helpful to use, I will continue to do it. I will bring other topics, and if you're my patient and you have any questions about this, I would love us to talk about this. I would love to hear your feedback. This is fundamentally made for you who are working with me, and I want to hear from you, and I really hope that this is helpful in our journey working together.